The stars looked cold and empty from the bridge of the alien ship called Dark Victory. Admiral Vextar stood with his 4 arms crossed behind his back, watching the small blue planet spin slowly in the black space. The planet looked harmless and weak, just like all the others his people had taken over in the past 3,000 years. His red eyes glowed in the dark as he studied the reports about this new world. The creatures living there called themselves humans, and they seemed very stupid. To him, their ships were made of simple metal and moved with fire and chemicals like ancient toys. Their weapons shot tiny pieces of metal instead of powerful energy beams. They had no mind powers at all, and their technology was so old it made him want to laugh. Behind him, his officers worked at their stations, preparing for another easy victory. The Galactic Council had conquered over 200 different species across the galaxy, and none of them had been able to fight back for very long. Most of them gave up after seeing just one council ship. Some of them tried to run away, but there was nowhere to hide in space. The smart ones surrendered right away and begged for mercy. Admiral Vextar had been doing this job for over 500 years, and he was very good at it. His people were tall and strong with thick purple skin and sharp claws. They could read minds and control weaker creatures with their thoughts. Their ships had shields that could stop any weapon and engines that could travel faster than light itself. No species had ever been able to hurt them. The humans would be no different from all the others. Captain Li Dongmin was drinking coffee on the bridge of his ship when the alien message came through. He almost dropped his cup when he saw the massive fleet that had appeared near the edge of their solar system. The ships were huge, bigger than any building on Earth, and there were thousands of them floating in space like metal mountains. His crew gathered around the communication screen as the alien voice spoke in perfect English. The voice was cold and mean, like someone who enjoyed hurting others. It said the humans had been chosen to join the Galactic Council, but they had to give up all their weapons and submit to alien rule. They had 72 hours to decide. If they said no, the aliens would kill everyone on Earth. Li Dongmin looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. He saw anger building up like a fire, getting ready to explode. The aliens had made a big mistake by threatening their families and friends. Back home, he opened a channel to Earth Command and reported what had happened. Within minutes, every military base on Earth was buzzing with activity. Presidents and generals from every country held emergency meetings. The alien message had been sent to every nation at the same time, so everyone knew what was coming. But something strange happened the aliens did not expect. Instead of panic and chaos, the humans began to work together like never before. Countries that had been enemies for years suddenly became allies. People who had never agreed on anything before all said the same thing: they would not surrender. President Kim Hae-won stood in the emergency meeting room surrounded by world leaders from every continent. The alien ultimatum was clear: submit or die. The council expected them to be scared and give up just like every other species had done before. But Kim Hae-won had studied history, and she knew that humans were different from other creatures. When someone tried to bully them, they did not run away or hide. They got angry and they fought back even when the odds were impossible. She looked around the room at the faces of prime ministers, presidents, and military commanders. Some were scared, but none of them wanted to give up. Their ancestors had fought against bigger and stronger enemies before and won through courage and determination. The vote was unanimous. Every single leader agreed to reject the alien demands. They would prepare for war back. In space, Admiral Vextar received the human response and could not believe what he was hearing. These primitive creatures were actually going to fight against the mighty Galactic Council. It was like watching insects try to attack a giant. He had seen this kind of stupid bravery before. Some species tried to resist at first, but they always gave up. When they saw how hopeless it was, the humans would learn the same lesson everyone else had learned. He ordered his fleet to move closer to Earth to show the humans how powerful the Council really was. The massive ships began to advance through space, their hulls gleaming with unknown metals and crackling With energy fields that could destroy entire cities on Earth, people watched the night sky and saw new stars appearing, stars that moved and grew brighter as they got closer. Children pointed at the lights and asked their parents what they were. Adults tried to explain, but their voices shook with fear and worry. But in military bases around the world, something different was happening. Soldiers and pilots and engineers worked day and night preparing for the fight of their lives. They knew they were facing an enemy with better technology and more experience, but they also knew something the aliens did not understand. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They had learned how to win even when they were outnumbered and outgunned. They had survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. They were still here because they never gave up. Captain Lee Dong-min received new orders to patrol the space around Mars and watch for alien scouts. His ship was small compared to the enemy vessels, but it was fast and well armed. His crew had trained for years for this moment, even though they never thought it would really happen. As he watched the alien fleet growing larger in the distance, he felt something he had never felt before. It was not fear exactly, though. He was definitely scared. It was more like excitement mixed with determination. These aliens thought humans were weak and primitive. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The countdown had begun. 72 hours until the ultimatum expired. 72 hours to prepare for the most important battle in human history. The aliens expected the humans to surrender before the time was up. They expected panic and chaos and desperate attempts to negotiate. What they got instead was something they had never seen before in 3,000 years of conquest. They got a species that refused to back down no matter how hopeless things looked. They got warriors who would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The stage was set for a war that would change the galaxy forever. On one side was the Galactic Council with their advanced technology, superior numbers, and thousands of years of military experience. On the other side were the humans with their primitive weapons, outdated ships, and stubborn refusal to give up. Admiral Vextar smiled as he watched his fleet take position around the human solar system. This would be over quickly, and then they could move on to the next conquest. The humans would learn what every other species had learned. Resistance was futile, but down on Earth, in military bunkers and space stations and shipyards, people were working with desperate energy, preparing for the fight of their lives. They knew they were probably going to lose, but they also knew they had to try. They could not let their families and friends become slaves without a fight. The aliens had made their choice. They had chosen war with humanity. Soon, they would discover what that choice really meant. The 72 hours passed like a bad dream that would not end on Earth. People watched the news and held their families close, knowing that death was coming from the stars. Children played in parks while their parents tried to act normal, but everyone could see the fear in their eyes. Admiral Vextar stood on his command bridge, watching the timer count down to 0. He had sent 50 of his best warships toward the human planet, expecting to find scared primitives hiding in caves or begging for mercy through radio transmissions. Instead, he found something that made no sense at all. The humans had not run away or hidden underground. Instead, they had moved their warships into formation around their planet, like they actually thought they could win a fight against the Galactic Council. It was the most foolish thing he had ever seen in 500 years of conquest. Commander Park Ji-hoon watched the alien ships approach from the bridge of his vessel, called Retribution. His ship was much smaller than the enemy vessels, and his weapons were much weaker, but he felt calm and ready for what was coming. His crew had trained for this moment. Their entire lives, the alien ships were beautiful in a terrible way. Their hulls gleamed like liquid metal, and energy fields danced around them like captured lightning. Each one was the size of a small city and armed with weapons that could crack moons in half. Any reasonable person would have been terrified. But Park Ji-hoon was not feeling terror. He was feeling something much more dangerous. He was feeling angry. These aliens had come to his home and threatened his family and friends. They had demanded surrender from people who had never learned how to give up. The alien commanders sent One final message to the human fleet. His voice was full of arrogance and certainty as he offered them one last chance to surrender. The humans could lay down their weapons and accept slavery, or they could die fighting a hopeless battle. Park Ji-hoon smiled as he opened the communication channel to respond. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. "This is Commander Park of the Earth Defense Force," he said. "We reject your ultimatum. We reject your authority. And we reject your assumption that we are weak." He paused for a moment, looking at the alien fleet through his viewscreen. "You chose war with humanity. Good luck surviving." The aliens opened fire first, just as everyone expected. Beams of pure energy lanced through space toward the human ships. The weapons were incredibly powerful, capable of vaporizing entire buildings in a single shot. The Council had used these same weapons to destroy the defenses of 200 different worlds, but something impossible happened. The energy beams struck the human ships and barely scratched their hulls. The aliens fired again and again, expecting to see the primitive vessels explode into clouds of debris. Instead, the human ships just kept flying forward, taking hit after hit without showing any serious damage. The alien weapons were designed to overload energy shields and disable electronic systems, but the human ships had no energy shields to overload. They were built like ancient fortresses with thick walls and strong foundations. Their hulls were made from layers of titanium steel and ceramic armor that could stop almost anything. Where other species built their ships to be fast and elegant, humans built their ships to survive. The aliens had been fighting enemies who used the same kind of technology they did, but humans had learned to build things differently. They made everything stronger and tougher than it needed to be because they knew that war was always harder than anyone expected. Lieutenant Commander Yoon So-young led the first human counterattack. Her squadron of small fighter ships accelerated toward the alien fleet at speeds that should have killed. Everyone inside the G-forces were so strong that most alien species would have been crushed into paste. But human pilots were different. They had been training in high-gravity chambers since childhood. Their bodies were enhanced with drugs and surgery to handle forces that would destroy normal people. They could fly maneuvers that other species thought were impossible. The aliens watched in shock as the human fighters approached at incredible speeds. They tried to target the small ships with their weapons, but the humans were moving too fast and changing direction too quickly. It was like trying to hit lightning with arrows. When the human fighters got close enough, they opened fire with their own weapons. But these were not energy beams or exotic particles. They were simple chunks of metal accelerated to tremendous speeds, railguns and magnetic cannons that fired solid projectiles like bullets from a gun. Alien shields had been designed to stop energy weapons and dispersed particles. They had no defense against solid metal. Moving at nearly the speed of light, the projectiles punched through their barriers like they were made of paper and tore through their hulls with devastating effect. One by one, the massive alien warships began to explode as human weapons found their weak points. The elegant energy fields that had protected them for thousands of years were useless against the crude but effective human attack. Within minutes, half the alien fleet was floating to breathe. Surviving aliens tried to retreat, but the human fighters followed them relentlessly. The pilots showed no mercy and gave no quarter. They had been taught that when someone threatens your home and family, you fight until either they are dead or you are dead. There is no middle ground. Admiral Vextar watched his beautiful warships die one by one and could not understand what was happening. His weapons were more advanced, his ships were bigger, his technology was superior in every way. How were these primitives winning? The answer was simple, but terrible. The aliens had spent thousands of years perfecting their technology, but they had forgotten how to really fight a war. They had become used to easy victories against enemies who gave up quickly. They had never faced an opponent who refused to quit no matter how bad things got. Humans had spent their entire history fighting wars against other humans. They knew that the side with better weapons did not always win. They knew that courage and determination could overcome almost any advantage. They knew that sometimes you had to be willing to die for what you believed in. The battle lasted only 3 hours, when it was over 25 alien warships were destroyed, and the rest were running away as fast as they could. Human fleet had lost only 2 ships and both crews had been rescued. The impossible had happened. The primitives had won. News of the battle spread across Council space faster than light. The reports seemed like lies or propaganda. How could advanced warships with energy shields and exotic weapons be defeated by metal projectiles and chemical explosives? It made no sense according to everything they knew about warfare, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans had won their first battle against the Galactic Council, and now they were preparing for the next one. Supreme Admiral Vextar could not sleep after reading the battle reports from the first attack. The humans had destroyed half his advance fleet with their primitive weapons and crude tactics. It had to be luck or some kind of trick that would not work twice. He called his war council together in the great chamber of his flagship. The other admirals and generals gathered around the holographic display showing the human solar system. Their faces showed confusion and anger at the unexpected defeat. We underestimated them, Vextar admitted, but his voice was still full of confidence. They caught us by surprise with their unusual methods, but now we know what to expect. We will send a real fleet this time and crush them completely. Admiral Kefver nodded his agreement. 300 ships should be more than enough to deal with these primitives, he said. Even if their weapons are effective, they cannot stand against such overwhelming numbers. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years by using massive fleets to intimidate their enemies. Most species surrendered when they saw how hopeless resistance would be. The few who tried to fight were quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. Colonel Han Min-su received the intelligence reports about the approaching alien fleet while coordinating Earth's defenses from a bunker deep underground. 300 enemy ships were heading toward their solar system. Each one was armed with weapons that could level entire cities. His staff officers looked worried as they studied the tactical displays. The humans had won their first battle, but this new alien fleet was 6 times larger than the first one, even with their advantages in weapons and tactics. The odds seemed impossible, but Min-su had studied military history his entire life, and he knew something the aliens did not understand. Every species they had conquered before had fought like them, ship against ship, formation against formation, technology against technology in open space battles. That is not how humans fight wars, he explained to his officers. We do not meet our enemies where they are strongest. We make them fight on our terms using our advantages. Captain Song Yu-jin, one of Earth's most brilliant tactical minds, smiled grimly as she understood what he meant. The aliens expected another space battle, with fleets shooting at each other until one side won. But humans had learned different lessons from centuries of warfare. The alien fleet arrived at Earth, expecting to find human ships waiting to fight them in space. Instead, they found nothing. The orbital platforms were silent, the defense stations were empty, and no human vessels rose to meet them. Admiral Vextar ordered his ships forward, suspicious but confident. Perhaps the humans had finally realized how hopeless their situation was and were preparing to surrender. As his fleet approached Earth's moon, he prepared to broadcast terms of surrender to the defeated population. That was when the humans revealed what 300 years of space exploration had really taught them. They did not just live in space, they had turned space itself into a weapon. The moon opened fire first. What the aliens had thought were natural craters on the surface were actually massive railgun installations buried deep in the rock and hidden from all sensors. The entire satellite had been converted into a fortress over decades of secret construction. Hundreds of projectiles launched from the lunar surface, moving at incredible speeds toward the alien fleet. The Council ships tried to dodge, but the weapons had been aimed perfectly using computers that had calculated their trajectories for hours in advance. At the same time, the asteroid belt came alive. Rocks that had drifted in predictable orbits for millions of years suddenly changed course, revealing themselves as hidden weapons platforms. Human engineers had been secretly installing engines and weapons on asteroids for years, turning space debris into mobile fortresses. Mars launched clouds of stealth drones that had been waiting in its upper atmosphere disguised as weather balloons. The drones were small and fast, designed to get close to enemy ships and detonate with nuclear warheads that could crack their hulls. Even Earth's seemingly peaceful orbital stations transformed into missile batteries. Solar panels folded away to reveal launch tubes filled with kinetic penetrators. Space elevators that looked like civilian transportation systems turned out to be enormous mass drivers capable of firing projectiles across the solar system. The alien fleet found itself surrounded by weapons they could not see until it was too late. The humans had not built a few ships to fight in space. They had spent centuries turning their entire solar system into one gigantic weapon. Admiral Vextar watched in horror as his beautiful warships were torn apart by attacks coming from every direction. His shields and armor were designed to handle energy weapons from other ships, not solid projectiles fired from planetary installations at velocities that defied belief. But the real shock came when the aliens tried to retreat. Captain Lee J-1 had been waiting in the outer system with Earth's true space fleet. These were not the obvious military vessels the aliens had seen before, but the real warships, built in secret facilities beyond Pluto, where no enemy scouts would think to look. The human fleet moved like ghosts through space, using advanced stealth technology and careful positioning to avoid detection until the perfect moment. They struck the retreating aliens from behind, cutting off their escape route and trapping them in a deadly crossfire. These crooked the retreating aliens from behind, cutting off their escape route and trapping them in a deadly crossfire. New human ships were different from the crude metal vessels the aliens expected. They were sleek and fast-built, using lessons learned from studying captured Council technology, but improved with human engineering principles. They moved in perfect coordination like a pack of wolves hunting together. The battle lasted 6 hours as the trapped alien fleet fought desperately to escape the human trap. But everywhere they turned, they found more weapons, more traps, more evidence that the humans had been preparing for this war much longer than anyone had imagined. When the shooting finally stopped, 300 alien warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Not a single human vessel had been destroyed, though several had taken damage. The impossible had happened again. The survivors who managed to escape carried news of the defeat back to Council space. Their reports seemed like the ravings of madmen. The primitives had turned their entire star system into a weapon. They had fought using tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. But the evidence was undeniable in the form of empty space where a great fleet had once been. The humans had won again, and this time they had done it against overwhelming odds across the galaxy. Other Council fleets began to receive new orders to prepare for war against an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The age of easy conquest was over. The humans had shown the galaxy something new. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. As panic spread through their space, the impossible had happened twice now, and fear was replacing the confidence they had felt for 3,000 years. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy, telling of human fleets appearing in places they should not be able to reach. President of Defense Operations Choi Dong-ho stood before the massive holographic display in the Human Command Center, watching red dots appear across 17 different sectors. Each dot represented a human strike force that had somehow traveled thousands of light years in just days. Aliens had expected the humans to stay in their own solar system and defend their home world like every other species had done. Instead, the humans had taken the war directly to Council space, attacking military bases, supply depots, and government facilities across half the galaxy. How are they moving so fast? Demanded Council Speaker Zethmer as he studied the intelligence reports. Our scouts showed they had barely achieved faster than light travel. Now they are hitting targets that should take months to reach. The Answer was both simple and terrifying. While the Council had focused on building bigger ships and stronger weapons, the humans had revolutionized space travel itself. They had not just built faster engines. They had discovered how to fold space itself, allowing their ships to step between stars like walking through doors. Admiral Park Soo-jin materialized her fleet inside the vegan system without any warning. One moment the Council's regional headquarters was secure behind layers of defensive platforms and patrol ships. The next moment human vessels were dropping out of folded space, already in perfect attack formation and firing their weapons. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could appear anywhere at any time without using the normal space lanes that could be watched and defended. Their entire military strategy was based on controlling key routes and establishing strong defensive positions against an enemy that could bypass all defenses and appear directly in their rear areas. They were completely helpless. Their generals had no training for this kind of warfare, and their admirals had no tactics that could deal with such mobility. But the humans were not content to simply use superior technology. They fought with a savage intensity that shook even the most experienced Council warriors. Every species the Council had conquered understood when to surrender, when to negotiate, when to retreat, to fight another day. Humans did none of these things. They fought until every enemy was dead, or every human was dead. There was no middle ground, no mercy, no quarter given or asked. Their attacks were planned with careful precision, but executed with ruthless determination. Captain Bae Hyo-jin led the assault on the Council's prison world of Next Step, where they kept millions of enslaved beings from conquered species. The aliens expected her to target the orbital defenses or government buildings, like a civilized military force. Instead, she went straight for the slave camps, broadcasting a message that was heard across the galaxy. "We are not here to capture territory or resources," she announced as her ships swept through the system. "We are here to free every species these monsters have enslaved. Every cage they have built, we will break open. Every chain they have forged, we will shatter." The attack on Next Step changed everything. The humans did not just defeat the Council forces guarding the prison world. They landed troops who opened every cell, freed every prisoner, and armed them with captured Council weapons. The liberated slaves joined the human forces and helped attack other Council installations. What terrified the Council leadership was not just the military defeat, but the philosophy behind it. Every species they had conquered before fought for their own survival, their own freedom, their own territory and resources. They were predictable because they acted in their own self-interest. Humans fought for everyone. They attacked prison worlds to free slaves they had never met. They armed former enemies and treated them as allies. They seemed willing to risk everything, not for conquest or profit, but for abstract ideas like justice and freedom within. Weeks the human example spread across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly rose in rebellion, using weapons and tactics learned from human advisors. The Council found itself fighting dozens of different revolts. Simultaneously, Admiral Kim Min-ho coordinated the liberation of the Centaur system, where 3 different species had been held in bondage for over 1,000 years. The local Council garrison expected a normal military engagement. Instead, they faced a coordinated uprising led by human special forces. Freed slaves did not just fight for their own worlds. They joined human fleets and helped attack other Council strongholds, spreading the rebellion like wildfire from system to system. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Council Admiral Vorthak tried to negotiate with the human commanders, offering territorial concessions and trade agreements in exchange for peace. His messages were answered by General Lee Young-suk, whose response became famous throughout known space. "Still do not understand," she replied. "The Council thinks this is about territory or resources or political power. You think you can negotiate with us like we are just another species seeking advantage in your empire. But you are wrong. This is about something you have never encountered before. This is about right and wrong." The Council had built their empire on the principle that Might makes right. The strong ruled the weak because they could, and the weak accepted it, because they had no choice. It was the natural order that had existed since the beginning of civilization. Humans rejected that entire philosophy. They believed that strength should protect the weak, not exploit them. They thought freedom was more important than safety, and justice was worth dying for. These ideas were so alien to council thinking that they could not comprehend them as world after world fell to human liberation forces. The council finally began to understand the true scope of their mistake. They had not just attacked another species. They had challenged a completely different way of thinking about civilization itself. The humans were not trying to replace the council empire with their own. They wanted to destroy the very concept of empire forever. They envisioned a galaxy where every species governed itself, where cooperation replaced conquest, and where no one could do to others what the council had done to them. For the first time in 3,000 years, the members of the Galactic Council knew real fear. They were not just losing a war, they were watching their entire worldview crumble as species after species chose freedom over security, chaos over order. The end was coming, and they could see it approaching like a storm that could not be stopped. The final battle would be remembered for 10,000 years as the day the galaxy changed forever. Fleet Admiral Kim Tae-hoon arrived at the Council home system with the largest fleet in human history. Behind him came ships from dozens of species that had been freed from Council rule. Former slaves now fought alongside their liberators, united in their determination to end the age of empire. Council's last great fleet waited in defensive formation around their massive space station that had served as the seat of galactic government for millennia. Supreme Admiral Vextar commanded over 1,000 ships gathered from the remnants of their crumbling empire. It was the most powerful force ever assembled in galactic history. Kim Tae-hoon felt sadness as he looked upon the enemy fleet, knowing how many lives were about to end. War was necessary, but that did not make it less tragic. He opened a final communication channel to the Council forces, offering them one last chance to avoid the coming destruction. "This is Admiral Kim of the Human Expeditionary Force," he broadcast to the waiting ships. "This is your final opportunity to surrender. Lay down your weapons, release your remaining prisoners, and we will show mercy to those who have shown none." Of Vextar's response came back filled with the arrogance and hatred that had defined Council rule for 3,000 years. "The Council does not surrender to primitives," he declared. "We have ruled this galaxy since before your species. Learn to make fire. We will destroy you as we have destroyed countless others." The battle began with the Council unleashing everything they had. Energy weapons that could boil oceans carved through space toward the human fleet. Missiles that could crack planets launched in massive volleys. Ships moved in formations perfected over centuries of conquest. A brief moment, it seemed like the old ways might triumph. The Council fought with desperate fury, throwing wave after wave of attacks at the approaching human forces. Their weapons lit up space like a miniature sun, and their ships danced through complex maneuvers with deadly precision. But they were fighting the wrong war against the wrong enemy. Every tactic they used, every strategy they employed was designed to defeat enemies who thought like them, who fought like them, who shared their assumptions about how civilized beings should conduct warfare. Captain Oh Min-young led her squadron through maneuvers that should have been impossible, her ships moving in 3 dimensions while the Council forces still thought in terms of naval battles on a flat plane. Major General Lee Seung-ho coordinated simultaneous attacks from above, below, and all sides, using tactics that confused defenders who had never faced truly multidimensional warfare. Council's greatest advantage had always been their psychic powers that allowed them to read enemy thoughts and predict their actions. But human minds had been trained from childhood to resist mental intrusion, using meditation techniques and mental discipline that made them nearly immune to psychic attack. Their energy shields that had protected them for millennia crumbled before kinetic weapons that followed no rules. They understood human projectiles punched through their barriers like they were made of paper, while their return fire was absorbed by armor that seemed impossibly thick. As the battle raged, Supreme Admiral Vextar watched his beautiful ships die one by one and finally began to understand the magnitude of his people's mistake. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They represented something completely new in the galaxy. A communication came through from the dying Council flagship, and Vextar found himself asking the question that had haunted him since this war began. Why do you fight so hard for species you have never met? Why risk everything for people who are not even your own? Kind Kintehun's answer was simple, but it carried the weight of human philosophy that had driven them across the stars. Because it is right, he replied. Because someone has to stand up to bullies. Because if we do not fight for others who cannot fight for themselves, then we are no better. Then youth battle ended when the Council space station surrendered with half their fleet destroyed and the remainder surrounded by human forces. The war was over, but its consequences would reshape civilization forever. In the aftermath, human forces helped establish a new kind of galactic government based on cooperation instead of conquest. The Confederation of Free Worlds allowed each species to govern itself while working together on matters that affected everyone. It was not perfect, and there were many problems to solve, but it was something the galaxy had never seen before. A government based on consent rather than force, on justice rather than might, on the radical idea that all thinking beings deserved freedom. Years later, historians would debate why the Council chose to fight humanity rather than seek peaceful coexistence. The answer was simple but profound. They chose war because they could not imagine any relationship between strong and weak except domination and submission. They understood only conquest and surrender, force and submission. They had never encountered a species that offered partnership between equals. Cooperation instead of exploitation. Strength used to protect rather than to dominate. The Galactic Council had ruled through fear for 3,000 years, making other species afraid of them. But fear was not the strongest emotion in the galaxy. There were things more powerful than fear. There was hope for a better future. There was love for family and friends. There was the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. There was the determination to fight for justice, even when victory seems hopeless. Council chose war with humanity, expecting to face another species driven by fear and self-interest. What they found instead was something that had never existed before in galactic history. They found a species driven by conscience. Humanity had not sought this war. They would have been content to live in peace and explore the galaxy as friends and partners. But when forced to choose between slavery and freedom, between submission and resistance, between what was easy and what was right, they made their choice. Galaxy would never be the same. The age of empire was over. The age of freedom had begun, and it all started because an alien admiral looked at a small blue planet and decided that the creatures living there were too weak to matter. He thought he was choosing an easy victory. Instead, he chose war. With humanity, history would remember his choice and the price his people paid for their arrogance. The Council had learned too late that there are some things worth fighting for and some enemies too dangerous to threaten. They had discovered that when you choose war with humanity, you do not just fight soldiers and ships, you fight an idea. An idea that says every thinking being deserves to be free, and ideas are harder to kill than fleets.